national parks represent a balancing act. For more than 100 years, parks have strived to protect and preserve the wildlife, plants, scenery, and stories that make parks special. But at the same time, parks are places for people. Park management is guided by a legislative philosophy and mandate to not only protect park resources, but also provide people with the opportunities to experience parks firsthand. National parks have never been separate from national and world events. They are influenced by our politics, feel the lingering effects wrought by the displacement of indigenous peoples, and are touched by our actions, such as high visitation and climate change. This year, the national park experience is faced with an additional challenge, a global pandemic. To discuss the challenges of meeting the goal of the national park idea in the midst of a pandemic, I'm joined by Brooklyn White and Naomi Boak, park rangers at Katmai National Park. They're here to discuss the Brooks River experience, how it's changed in the face of COVID-19, and what you can do to lessen the risks of spreading or contracting the novel coronavirus if you choose to visit national parks. Naomi, Brooklyn, it's great to speak with you once again, and thanks for joining me on this important topic.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
And I'd like to remind our audience, if you haven't taken the Bear Camp viewer survey yet, please do so. You can find a link to that in the featured comment right below the live camera feed on explore.org. So please check that out if you haven't done so already. This year, for so many of us, it's just been really different in a lot of ways. I don't know if I have a really succinct way of saying that otherwise. And it's not considered a typical year in national parks either. So maybe to begin, we could talk about what a quote unquote normal, experience or a typical year at Brooks Camp would look like this year. Everything from, arriving to, some going to the wildlife viewing platforms at the river. Brooklyn, do you want to try to take us through some of those experiences that people would have in a more normal year?
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember even the first time that I flew into Brooks Camp, and it was majestic, seeing the deep, rich green spruce forest, seeing the extensive water, and then getting that little glimpse of the river before landing at the beach was so exciting. And arriving is difficult. You can't drive to Brooks Camp. You have to either get there by plane or by boat. And most often people arrive by plane out of King Salmon, which is about a 15-minute plane ride. And they land on the water because they're arriving on a float plane. So you are landing, which is always exhilarating. It was the first time that I'd ever been on a float plane. So that was also tremendously exciting. But then you arrive on the beach, and it's a pumice-covered beach, which I had also never experienced in my life. So the first moment you arrive, you're just greeted by sometimes even a bear on the beach waiting for you to say, hello, you've made it to Brooks Camp. But you arrive, and then you make it to the beach, and you're immediately ushered to an orientation. And that is because we've got so many bears. And so we want to provide the best practices for being on the ground in Brooks Camp around bears, what you need to learn, what you need to do. And oftentimes when planes are arriving, people are smushed into that building so we can get as many people out and about learning what they need to learn and then actually able to go and make their way and experience what it's like in Brooks Camp. So you've gone through your orientation, you receive your bear orientation pin that says, I've learned everything I need to know, and then you're released into the wild. Oftentimes you kind of find yourself ushered towards a bridge. Previously, it was a bridge that was right on the water, but last year we opened the elevated walkway. And so that allows you to walk over the river, Brooks River, and has platforms on either side for viewing of bears. We ask people, to keep moving on those walkways, because so much of what we ask is we want to not be an obstacle for the bears. We're there to view them, but we don't want them to be impaired by us standing over them or feeling like they can't feed or do what they need to do to survive. And so we continue to ask people to be vigilant when they are on walkways, and especially once they make their way onto the trails that are going to lead them out to the falls. So you've made your way across the bridge, and now you are heading towards the falls platform. You've got a little over a mile walk to get there from the orientation building. And so you're making your way, and you are on the ground where bears could be. You're going to see lots of bear trails as you're making your way, and evidence that bears are definitely around you. Sometimes you may even run into a bear, and that's when you pull out all of that information that you learned during your orientation, because we are wanting to prepare you, because oftentimes you're going to encounter a bear when you're on your way to the falls. So you've made your way down the trail. You've now found the gate that's going to lead you to the falls platform. And sometimes you are not the first person that has attempted to get out to the falls. And so there may be a wait list that requires you to wait anywhere from 15 minutes to a couple hours, depending on the season. But oftentimes you'll be met by a ranger in this little platform here that we call the Treehouse. It's covered. There's lots of interpretive signs. And then once you are ready, you'll be called up and allowed to go out to the viewing platform. We ask, there's only 40 people on the platform. That's the number that's been decided is the least intrusive to the bears that are fishing along the falls. Again, when we are it's an amazing experience to be able to be there and witness the bears in this habitat, but we want to do our best to not be blocking them from being able to make that living. And so it can often be crowded on that platform. 40 people doesn't sound like a lot, but when you get them in that small space, it can feel crowded. But it's still an amazing opportunity, and you'll rotate through if there are that many people going. But your experience is often dictated by how many people are around you, and the rules that have been put in place to protect not only you, but the bears. So it's very interesting to see kind of what makes up that normal trip, what a typical year at Brooks Camp looks like. And we definitely felt like it was helpful to give you this kind of base knowledge if you've never been able to be at Brooks Camp, never traveled there, what the year typically would look like, and then what kind of changes we have ultimately put in place to best protect people and rangers to keep Brooks Camp open. Can we get maybe a little bit more context about where Brooks Camp is and an idea of how this kind of fits in to the greater Alaskan area?
Yeah, well, I will talk briefly about the community that we sit in. Brooklyn mentioned how remote this place is. No roads leading here, but we are part of a community, and 30 miles across Naknek Lake is the Bristol Bay community of king salmon and Naknek, and there's a very strong tie to the people in that community. Many of the staff who work here year-round, they are part of that community, and that community has a very large Alaska Native population that is tied to this area for thousands of years. We're about a little over 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, and so it may seem remote, but we do have those connections to other parts of Alaska and other parts of the world, and the pandemic does reach us. It may seem like, oh, we're so far away from everything, but we're still part of the world. And Mike, you want to talk a little bit more about the geography here and how we are connected to other parts of the world?
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of those main points, Naomi. Katmai is a very remote place, but it is connected to the rest of the world, just because people visit from so many different areas. In a normal year, people are traveling from many different nations. They're traveling from across the United States. It's about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, and those communities in the vicinity of Katmai really aren't connected in any significant way by roads. A few of them might connect up by some small roads, such as the villages or the towns of King Salmon and Naknek. Naknek or King Salmon, excuse me, is a small, sprawling community surrounded by an airport. It's currently and a currently mothballed Air Force base, but Naknek is the main hub of the salmon fishery in Bristol Bay, and its population swells to several thousand people in early summer when the salmon fishery is in full swing. And there's only one small medical clinic serving the two communities. And so, like you said, I mean, these areas seem like they're so remote that it would be safe from something like COVID-19. But with people visiting from around the world and around the nation, this area is in no way isolated enough to prevent the arrival of a highly infectious disease. So, Naomi, I'm wondering, what has the park done this year? How has the park sort of changed operations at Brooks Camp to maybe lessen the risk of that virus spreading at Brooks Camp, and also to ensure that employees are safer?
Yeah, I wish we could figure a way to get rid of the bugs this year, as you guys see me swatting around as I'm outside on the bridge. Essentially, what the park has done is similar to what we've done in terms of safety with bears. There is no way we can eliminate risk here with bears. We can show you how to be safe. We can encourage you to give bears right of way, but there still is some risk. And it's the same thing here with the COVID-19 virus and pandemic. You could be safer under certain conditions, but not completely safe. And as many of you on the cams know, I view myself as a COVID curmudgeon who wears a mask all the time, and I was infected with the virus about a month ago. So what the park has done is to really create an atmosphere of a partnership between the staff here and the people who visit. And that partnership is, first, we wanted to make sure that staff coming here were safe for them, excuse me, and that we were not going to infect each other or others. So when many of us arrived from all over the country to King Salmon, we had to quarantine for 2 weeks. We were tested for COVID-19 upon arrival, and we were tested again before leaving quarantine and being able to come out to Brooks Camp. So we were pretty darn sure that those of us working here were not going to infect each other and not going to infect those visitors who came here. And the park also tried to make it safe for us by limiting the number of staff that we have here, so it wasn't so crowded in housing. I, for instance, don't have a roommate in my cabin. That's the situation for a number of people here, which it wouldn't be that way during last year's season. So, and we also have a little bit of space in case someone does become infected, and that person will not infect others. So the park did an enormous amount of planning to keep us safe and therefore you safe. And I think some of the training with bears helped out on that, about social distancing and being alert. And so the other part of that partnership is what you as visitors can do coming here to not only keep yourselves as safe as possible in a pandemic, but also be safe around other visitors so you're not potentially infecting them, and also not potentially infecting the staff that work here. So one of the things that we've done, I kind of switched things around today. So the bridge is behind me facing north towards camp. And there really are no places to wash your hands here for the public. So we have put hand sanitizing stations in high touch points like on the bridge. So when you're going through that gate, there is Purell there. And it'd be great if people can put hand sanitizer on before they touch the gate and after, because then you're protecting not only yourself, but you're helping to protect others who might also be touching that gate. We have hand sanitizer in a number of locations around the park, so we encourage that. We ask that people wear masks when around other people that are not part of their family group or what they consider their traveling group that they're comfortable with. That protects both them and those around us, and importantly, the many people who work here. And we can't mandate that you wear masks, but we ask for your partnership in this. And we also watch the bears social distance to stay safe while they're fishing. And we keep a good social distance from the bears by being 50 yards from them. And we ask that people who are not in your family group social distance at least 6 feet from each other. We may be outdoors, but obviously the virus finds its way in. So by creating this partnership, we can help be safer. We ask that people be conscious of how far they are away from other people on platforms. At the Falls platform, we have marked it so there are places where family groups can be together on the platform, and then there's a space in between where no one can stand, so that there is 6 feet between an individual or a family group. As Brooklyn mentioned, the normal number in a normal year, the number of people on the Falls platform would be 40. This year, we are limiting it to 16 maximum. Could be less if there's a family group that only has 1 or 2 people. And again, this is so that you on the Falls platform are safer, and that any rangers like a bear monitor or a media ranger who are working out there are safer as well. And we have some markings out on the Riffles platform and ask for the same kind of behavior. The park is really doing what it can. We closed down when we had some cases here, so that those people who might have come in contact with someone who tested positive could quarantine, and that meant keeping other rangers safe as well as visitors. So even though I contracted COVID-19 while I was here, I will say that the park has done everything it could possibly do to keep everyone who is here as safe as possible. And again, it's like our contact with bears. There's always some risk. We can have safe practices and we can have this partnership of safety, but there's always some risk. And the other part of this place is the lodge. Now, the lodge was closed until August 10th. It served a bag lunch for our day visitors. That was another thing we did, which was to not have overnight visitors until August 10th, to again have more safe practices here. The campground is still closed and will be for the season, because we felt that we just couldn't have enough sanitary conditions in the campground in this pandemic. So there's a lot that's been done, and many painful hours of park management months prior to the late opening of Brooks Camp to plan all this out. But the rest of Katmai that's not the Brooks Camp developed area is open, and you can camp out there. So a lot of details and things to remember, but this this is a great place to come if we can keep this in mind. And part of that is the lodge. And Brooklyn is someone who has worked at the lodge and knows the lodge really well. Maybe you can talk about what the lodge is doing this year that's different.
Yeah. I mean, as Mike had mentioned, you know, globally, we are connected just because of how many people across the world come to visit this place. And so the lodge already had so many precautions in place because people could be traveling not knowing that they're sick, even with the common cold. And it's so easy, especially in a setting like a buffet, which is the typical setup for the lodge, to be coming in contact with potential germs that were spread from people. And so they already had lots of precautions in place prior to 2020 COVID. And so they were very mindful about how to be sanitizing and how often they were cleaning things. And so the transition to the precautions they've taken for this year was pretty natural. They had additional trainings, of course, with management to make sure that everyone was on the same page about some of those necessary guidelines that had been passed down, which included wearing masks, social distancing when applicable, hand sanitizer stations. They have those on all of the buildings as well, either on the outside or inside the door. So you can make sure that you're sanitizing, very similar to what they're doing on the bridge as well. And then just strengthening cleaning supplies and making sure that they were going over those high touch areas. Their goal has really been to limit the places that guests can come into contact or places that guests may be touching, to make sure that they are able to do their best to keep visitors and employees safe. One of the biggest transitions this year, though, has been moving from a buffet style eating area to having assigned seats for guests that are on a rotation. So each guest has a time that they're coming to eat in the lodge. And then the eating area itself is at half capacity. So they don't have that kind of clustered feeling of people coming in and eating all of the time. It's very regimented. But then they provide pre-plated meals that are being delivered straight from the kitchen to the guests that are eating in the lodge. So they've taken a lot of steps to reduce the amount of contact that guests are going to have with different areas, and are putting a lot of employees, they're doing a lot more than they did previously. I think it's also interesting just to get the perspective of what it's like to be an employee in the season of COVID. And it's changed things for both the lodge staff and for the NPS. There are significantly less people working out in Brooks Camp this year, almost half the staff in many instances. And so that's required a lot of additional hours, more roles being placed on people that typically would have had, you know, a specific job. Now they're having to be a little bit more flexible because they don't have that same kind of coverage that typically would have been in, you know, a normal season. But it also helps balance because there have been fewer guests that have been coming this year. So it's been able to balance a little bit in that way, just because the traffic has been significantly lessened. So it's interesting just to see what kind of changes have been put in place as protections, really, for you know, people that are coming in. But I think even more, it's interesting to listen and hear about what kind of impact COVID has had on the local community. We've had some local guests that have been coming in to Brooks Camp, but for the most part, it's been people that have been traveling. Mike, do you have any information that you could share, just some of the history of pandemics in the local area and maybe how that has played into the way that the local community has responded to COVID?
Sure thing. You know, rural Alaska, including the Katmai region, is really no stranger to significant hardship brought by pandemics. Just a little over 100 years ago, in fact, the area was reeling from the after effects of the 1918 flu pandemic. And half of all deaths in Alaska, I was just looking up some statistics on this, half of all deaths in Alaska in 1918 and 1919 were caused by that pandemic flu. And death rates were double those experienced, double in Alaska, those experienced in the rest of the United States. And the flu was especially devastating to Alaska Native people and Alaska Native communities. And those Alaska Native people accounted for something like 82% of the pandemic flu deaths in Alaska in 1918 and 1919. Many villages in the Katmai area were greatly affected by this flu, including one that had only been recently established. And actually, the people at this village have had very close ties with the Katmai area. And that's a village that was called New Savanosky. No one actually lives there currently right now. But New Savanosky was home to people displaced by the 1912 Novarupta Katmai eruption. 54 people lived there in 1918. After the 1912 eruption, they thought they couldn't go back to their homes in New Savanosky, at Old Savanosky at the head of Naknek Lake. The area was just so ash covered that they thought they couldn't go back. So they established this new village between King Salmon and Naknek on the Naknek River. Here's a photo of what remains of New Savanosky Village that I took in 2010, I believe. And in 1918, there were about 54 people living there. But the flu really swept through that community and devastated it. Treefawn Anguson Sr., in fact, in 1985, he was viewed about his earlier life, and part of that interview by one of his relatives, he recalled some of the experiences that he had at that village during the flu pandemic itself. And in 1985, he recalled, and I quote, "Everybody died all over. I was at New Savanosky. There were about 10 houses there, I guess. And there weren't many alive. Some walk around at night and just drop. It was horrible. The people from the Alaska Packers Association cannery take them and bury them in one big hole. There's a big cross there and a bunch of people buried in there." And end quote. That hole that he's talking about actually was at the old Russian, what we call now the old Russian Orthodox Church in Savanosky Village, and this is a photo of it right here. And that grave would have been kind of on the side facing where our perspective right now. So just a mass grave right next to there, because of the death caused by that flu pandemic. So the residents of this area, I mean, they expressed heightened concern about COVID-19 because the memory of the devastation caused by the 1918 flu still resides in these communities in Bristol Bay. So it's really a time, for everyone to be careful and cautious to protect ourselves and others. Now, 100 years later, experiencing something that could, that is disabling for our society, has caused, something like 170,000 or 150,000 deaths in the United States alone. I forget the current stats, but it's, of course, not great, obviously. So it's time to be cautious and careful and protect ourselves and others. But we want to think about that. I think more specifically, Naomi, what can we do, individually if we're visiting Brooks Camp or visiting other national parks to reduce the risk of, contracting or spreading this virus? We touched on a little bit of those things earlier, but I think there's some other thoughts that you wanted to share and a video that you wanted to share with us towards the end of our conversation here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very special place. I think we, the three of us have talked about that, and not just the cultural history, which is so incredible and important, but just look behind me. I mean, this is an incredible place. And when Brooklyn mentioned about arriving on Naknek Lake, I had the same memory when I first arrived here. It's a very special place. Everything here, and of course the bears, which we love. And I think that I have very strong personal feelings that a closeness and an appreciation to nature and our natural environment creates empathy, and empathy among our fellow humans. And I think that that's what we need this year. We need to think about others around us and have the same kind of respect that we have for the bears and how they live their lives, and respect for others here, both those who visit, your fellow visitors, and those who work here. And as again, I said before, it's a partnership and requires coordination. And if we can do that, you can enjoy one of the most incredible places and experiences on earth. I mean, just, every day I'm here, I feel privileged and have a gratitude bucket that's really full for being able to be here. So having that understanding, we made a video for those of you who are planning to come here during this time, and so that we can have this partnership to increase our safety, and in the meantime enjoy the wonders of Brooks Camp and Katmai National Park. So here is a video we made, a brief video, it's less than 3 minutes long, about recreating responsibly here at Brooks Camp in 2020.
Greetings from Brooks Camp here in Katmai National Park and Preserve. Whether you're coming to watch the bears fish the lip of the falls, or you're coming here to do some fishing yourself in our Brooks River, we have some health and safety tips to help keep yourself, the rangers, and the other visitors safe during your trip.
From the moment your feet hit the sand, we ask you to stay safe around bears, including staying at least 50 yards away from them at all times. Now that we're in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic, we ask that you use that same vigilance to stay at least 6 feet away from all non-family members, including rangers. When you are on the bridge, platforms, and trails, be aware of the people around you and avoid areas that become crowded. Just as you would step off the trail to give a bear space, create distance when passing other families on trails and walkways.
The bears of Brooks River are world champions at social distancing. The normally solitary bears have figured out how to live and fish in close proximity to each other by social distancing. In order to help facilitate social distancing, limits have been placed on how many people can be in a space at one time.
We ask that when inside a place like the visitor center, on platforms, or when near someone not in your group, that all visitors wear a face mask. If you or someone in your group is feeling sick or has come into contact with somebody who has tested positive for COVID-19, we ask that you delay your trip. We will be happy to welcome you when you are feeling better. We also ask that you use hand sanitizer frequently. If you're unsure where to find some, just ask a ranger.
Please continue to check the Katmai National Park website for updates on operating status. If you need assistance in planning your trip or would like more information, give us a call or email us and we will be happy to help. We could take a page out of the Bears book by practicing patience and flexibility. This will not be your typical trip to Brooks Camp, but it can be an incredibly memorable opportunity to safely enjoy the wonders of Katmai National Park. The famous Brooks Falls, birds and other wildlife, the beautiful and serene Lake Brooks, archaeological sites that bear the 9,000 years of human history in this remote part of Alaska, and of course, bears, bears, bears. We look forward to welcoming you to Brooks Camp and working together with you to recreate responsibly. See you soon.
You know, I think one of the most important lines from that video is that we can work together to recreate responsibly, because it truly is up to all of us, practicing those precautions to be able to keep Brooks Camp open, and to keep visitors and rangers safe alike, and to be able to keep people healthy. But if we do that together, we can truly make that difference. But this reaches even further than just Brooks Camp or Katmai National Park. It touches on really the national park experience across the country. Mike, do you have some thoughts on that?
I do, and I'd like to, thank both of you for providing your insights on this important topic in this year. Operating national parks and helping people have an enjoyable experience while protecting the things that make parks special has always been a challenge, but it's become especially difficult in a world experiencing a pandemic. I've worked in 9 different national parks, so I consider myself to have some fairly thorough experience about what it takes to provide a good experience for people visiting. And rangers have always had a tough job. They have it especially tough this year. So national parks, I think this year are going to experience a wave of summer and fall tourism. So I'm asking to please just be cautious and respectful when you visit. Like Naomi said, please be empathetic to the rangers that you see, the staff that you see, the fellow visitors that you see. And September is likely to be a busy month at Brooks River this year. The emergence of COVID-19 has certainly added an additional risk to a visit. The changes in guidelines that Brooklyn and Naomi discussed were developed with public health in mind, but we can't escape the fact that the facilities at Brooks Camp and most other national park areas were designed to funnel people together instead of spread them out widely across the landscape. So when we visit, national parks, we have to keep that in mind. But we should never lose sight of the fact, or the sight of the reasons that we visit national parks. We visit them to seek solace in the present, and to find hope for the future. I think we visit parks to remember and learn about the events that shaped our nation. We visit to understand and to be inspired by the natural world. And for those reasons and others, parks are more important than ever before. And visiting them responsibly has never required more public cooperation and dedication to protect and preserve the national park idea and experience. Naomi, Brooklyn, thanks again for joining me today on the live chat on this important topic. I've always enjoyed having you along, and great insights today.
Thank
Great
you.
to be here.
And my name is Mike Fitz with Explore.org. Have a great day, and stay well during these challenging times.